Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out Podcast, a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, their most authentic lives. I am your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Career Minds. Today, I'm excited to welcome Aurelie Foucart. Aurelie was born and raised in Paris, France, and at an early age, she had dreams of being a writer, a musician, and an artist. However, her mom had a different idea, and she encouraged Aurelie to go to college and get a corporate job so she wouldn't have to rely on a man to take care of her. Aurelie went off to law school, and she started her career in HR, then quickly transitioned to management consulting, where she worked for Accenture and Capgemini. Aurelie later left the corporate world and took the leap of faith to start her own business as a career coach and executive coach. In this episode, Aurelie shares her personal story of living in France and her identity shift from working in corporate to being an entrepreneur, living free, and being independent. So without further ado, please enjoy Aurelie Foucart and her clocking out story. Hi, Aurelie. Welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you. Hi, Raymond. Very happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I am so excited. For context for our listeners, you and I met, it's been over 5 years now that you started coaching with Career Minds. And I'm just so happy to have you as part of the team and really appreciate you carving out some time today.
Thank you. I very much enjoy also working with Career Minds and everything we've done and how we've been working and how Career Minds has been growing over the years. It's a true joy.
Yeah. Well, we're going to dig into more of that in terms of your role today and the work that you're doing. One of the things I've really appreciated and just getting to know your background is how you started in the corporate world. And I know that you have a really interesting clocking out story, but just really excited to share with our listeners about your background and what your journey has been. So you ready to jump in?
Yeah, ready to jump in, Raymond.
Great. Well, Aurelie, one of the things that I'd love to do is just share with us a little bit about who you are. And I know you're currently residing in Paris, but share with us, where did you grow up? What did your parents do for a living? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Paris, grew up in Paris, although I love traveling. I've been traveling a lot. I lived for some years in Spain because my mother is of Spanish origin. So I've been living there for a few years. So my parents, my dad was, because he's now retired, like for a few years only, but he was a teacher in high school. And my mom is still working and she's a psychologist, a clinician psychologist. And she works especially with courts, with the court system. So she does expertise for the court system in France.
So what is it like growing up in Paris? Did you grow up in the city or were you out in the countryside?
Yeah, in the city. So a very urban upbringing. And it is true that, I feel like a city girl, right? An urban woman. I really enjoy having everything close and close by and to be able to go in the city, feel the pulse of the city. This is something that I've always loved. And even though I love going to the countryside, for example, for holidays, I really love the chaos of the city in a way, but also being able to having everything around, bars, grocery shops, delicatessen, cinemas, movie theaters. Everything is for me very important. And in Paris, what I've loved and what I've enjoyed also is, the diversity that was present and is still present in Paris. And of course, the culture also, like being able to, on a Sunday, go to the
Mm-hmm.
Louvre Museum or go to, so many artistic or historical places. This, I think, has been very important in my upbringing. And it's true that when I thought about maybe moving or go to other places, I've always have had that impulse for going to see like cultural places, historical places. This has
Mm-hmm.
always been, quite enjoyable for me.
I can relate to that. However, I live in the countryside. I live on the outskirts of Philadelphia, and I'm 2 hours from New York City. And when I take the train into New York and have the weekend where I'm, going to museums in the park and maybe going to a show, I like the hustle and bustle for a weekend, but I'm not, I'm always looking forward to getting back to to the suburbs where things are a lot slower.
And I totally understand this balance. And well, now I'm living in a house just in the outskirts of Paris. But
Hmm.
I must say that this has been a transition for me. It was my husband who wanted to live outside of Paris. And for me, it was difficult because I was very used to, the city. I walk very fast. I'm like, a true urban person, like for sure. And I think I love the slower pace of the suburbs, and yeah, I enjoy it, especially for the kids. I think it's an incredible environment,
Mm,
but also I know that at heart I remain, and I need to be very close to the city, and which
mm,
is good because now I'm really like 15 minutes away from the city, and still I'm living in a city which is quite a big city, very urban still.
mm.
But yeah, it's very interesting also what you're sharing, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I bet for your family, it's nice to be outside of the city, where you can, I'm sure the quality of life is fantastic and you have
Yeah,
the luxury of going into the city when you want that, and
absolutely.
then that's sort of how I feel, kind of where I live today. When I was a lot younger, I'd always want to be in the city. So can very much appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Aurelie, I'm curious at an early age, when you're thinking about what you want to be when you grew up, did your parents have an influence? You said your dad was a teacher, your mom was a psychologist. Like, did they influence what your dreams of what your career was going to look like?
I'm sure we always have influences. They didn't pressure me into doing anything in particular.
Hmm.
I don't have the kind of influence where, oh, everybody is an engineer and my daughter, you're going to be an engineer. Or
Mm,
so I didn't, there was no kind of, this family story of, having to take on kind of a family project or history. And I think my parents were very focused on making sure that we would be happy, fulfilled, that each of us, my sisters and I, would choose the career path that we were really comfortable with. For sure, I had a lot of kind of artistic influences in a way, in that I was reading a lot, I was a bookworm. At some point, I wanted to be a writer. I did also a lot of music. I was playing piano. I played piano for many years. I was even in a junior high where I had class in the morning and piano in the afternoon, every afternoon. And so at some point, I also thought, well, maybe that could be a career path. So it's very interesting that in maybe my early childhood, I was very much more focused on artistic endeavors. But quite quickly, when I reached maybe high school and then also further like higher studies after high school, like college, university, that's when really I knew I wanted to work in like more corporate kind of profession.
That's so interesting. So even at an early age, you had this idea where you wanted to help individuals, help people sort of through coaching identify what their career path was going to be. I am curious though, it sounds like you had such a passion for music, writing, the arts. I'm curious, why didn't you choose that as a career path?
Yeah, very good question. I think it felt a little too unstable
Mm,
as a career path. And also, yeah, one influence that I've had from my mom in particular was the fact that I should really be independent career wise, and I should not rely on a man for my career, for my money. So I think that had kind of a deeper influence in the fact that, oh, well, okay, maybe a career in writing or a career in music is not going to provide me enough safety and stability to really
mm.
pursue.
I love that. So the influence that you had from your parents wasn't necessarily the influence of what degree, but as you were really sort of contemplating what it is that you want to do with your life, your mom was an influence to say, whatever you do, Aurelie, don't rely on a man to take care of you. And so I'm curious, Aurelie, what did you ultimately decide to do in terms of your education and where did you go from there?
Yeah, so I started studying law. So I went to law school. I did get a master's of law from two universities, one in Spain, in Madrid, and one from Paris, from La Sorbonne. And at the time, so you see, I this was more to have some knowledge and to have a first kind of breadth of knowledge under my belt. At some point, I thought maybe I'm going to be a lawyer, even though I never really worked as a lawyer. And quite soon after, I entered a business school where I really studied really like corporate topics like human resources, marketing,
Mm.
finance, sales, etc., etc.
That's such a great combination. I think a lot of HR professionals get an employment law degree, which is really focused on labor and employment law. And it's a great combination, I believe, for you to have. It's a differentiator. And I wondered, after you graduate from college, I know that over your career, you worked for a U.S. based company, French based company, and for someone who has this desire to really want to get some global experience, is it typical for a French student who comes out of college to start their first job working for a French based company, or was that intentional? I just wonder how your job search strategy was in terms of looking for your first position.
So I wanted to work in a big and global company. Yes,
Mm,
especially I started in a very niche HR department at a large insurance company in France. And then I transitioned to management consulting at Accenture and then Capgemini. And I think this is more maybe personal choice and preference in that I really wanted to join a big company, and yeah, if possible, a global company. That was very
mm,
important for me. But I know many of my friends who chose more like smaller companies, maybe more like French based companies. So this is not necessarily, typical.
I'm interested to know what's the difference in the cultures in terms of, a French business versus a U.S. business?
Well, there are many differences, I think. First, I think in like really in many parts in France, like people, like employees are very involved and working a lot, even though we have a labor law that is way more protective of the rights of the workers in
Mm,
France. So this has a lot of influence in many ways. The fact that we have 3 month notice period when we change a job in France versus like I know in the US it can be a 2 weeks notice period. So in France, for example, we have this view of US companies where one morning you just show up at work and your manager tells you to pack your paper box with your laptop and you're asked to leave. And this is very anxiety producing for any French worker because this is absolutely not typical in France, in that you have a lot of protective kind of laws. So if you change, like if you're laid off or if you finish a contract, if you're resigning, you're going to have a 3 month notice period.
mm,
Also, the fact that there are a lot of benefits in that, for example, maternity leave, but also paternity leave. So there are a lot of benefits for the workers. And overall, a lot of vacation and holidays, that is for sure. So we can have the stereotype of the French worker where, he's always on holidays or, yeah, he's always out of the office, vacationing somewhere. So of course, those are stereotypes, even though, I mean, there is some truth to it, I'm sure. I would say that in the companies I've been working in, and also at the level that I've been working, people were working quite a lot. And overall, I would say that, yeah, French people work quite a lot, but usually longer hour in a day, even though they have more holidays. So it's going to be probably like structured differently in a way.
mm. Yeah, that's so interesting when you were just articulating this idea of, employees having a lot of time off where they can go on holiday, and just how, employment contracts are structured around giving a notice period if you're going to be losing your job. And it's just interesting how after COVID, people are now more hybrid, more remote, working from home. I think there's like an inherent trust factor where I feel like, corporate here in the States, there's a lack of trust of employee, how much work is the employees really doing when they're working virtually, and this desire for companies to want to, constantly have a finger on the pulse of what their employees are doing at every, just throughout the day. And it's just really interesting to hear you describe sort of the employment contract with a French company. And I would imagine that employees who, are taking time off when they come to work, I would imagine that they're really focused on their work. And it makes me think about this idea of a 4-day work week where, you're
Right.
condensing the amount of work that you're doing in 4 days. And then you can take a 3-day weekend versus a 2-day weekend. And so I think it's a mindset that companies have to kind of shift to. If you want to retain your employees, it's really around the trust that you're having with your employees. And I feel like there's much more of a retention issue with companies in the US than they have in France. But, there's a lot of profitable companies in France, right? I think that,
Yeah.
you can have the best of both worlds. So it's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, it's true that also that is probably cultural, that I would say in France, people on average stay longer within a company than in the US, even though this is also, of course, changing. And I think everywhere in the world now there has been a cultural shift and a big change compared with the generation of our parents, right? Where our
Mm,
parents would stay so many years within the same company, at least in Europe and in particular in France. And this has shifted for sure.
mm,
And yeah, the notion of trust, I think, is present everywhere in different ways. It's true that in France, it is very normalized the fact that you have weeks off and quite many weeks off throughout the year, even though a lot of workers still take their laptop to go on holiday. But this is pretty much normalized. But maybe that trust factor is going to play in other ways in France,
mm,
maybe not regarding the holidays, but maybe, yeah, in other on other plans, like maybe, for example, that work from home versus work at the office factor, or other factors like that.
mm. So you spent the next several years working at Accenture, and I know that you ended up going to work for Capgemini after that, which really provided just a fantastic foundation for you to kind of go out on your own. And I wonder, Aurelie, what was the moment when you realized that you had what it needed? Like, what you had the experience that you needed in order to go off on your own? Like, was there a moment in time, or was it sort of developing and evolving over time?
So, yeah, I had been managing teams as a management consultant, working on wider and bigger projects. I met an incredible mentor who proposed me a job as a human resources director within Capgemini. So, transitioning from management consulting to really a more operational role, but also a director role,
Mm,
right? And so then also I had another role as corporate responsibility director at Capgemini. And I think all those experiences led me to think that, okay, I've closed the loop in a way. I've done management consulting, I've done uh, human resources director role. I've worked as a corporate social responsibility because those issues were super important to me, like
mm,
diversity topics. I've always been very interested in those topics. And I think I reached a point where both I felt that, well, it's now or never,
mm,
and also that I had, in a way, seen enough, and that also if I took another role, let's say within Capgemini, I was also on a, like, going on a journey that wouldn't be as fulfilling as well. So
mm,
I think it's a conjunction of factors that made me think, well, let's do the move. And yeah,
mm,
because it is now or never. And also, if I start a new role, well, I'm going to be 2, 3 years in that new role. I also felt that I was doing more and more reporting work as I was, climbing the ladder. And I was thirsty also for a more direct approach and, working on the core topics that I had always enjoyed, like leadership, coaching, and I was doing less and less of that in a way as I
mm,
was, climbing the ladder and taking up like higher positions. So I think it was a conjunction of factors that, yeah, made
mm,
me think that this was the right time, even though it was thoroughly scary, like very, very scary
mm.
to take the leap.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you just described, this journey that I think many people take, right? Like, you're in you how you describe corporate, and you're getting all this experience, and with experience comes more responsibility, and you are sort of doing what every very driven career person does. You get experience, and then you take the next assignment. And then that assignment
Yes.
is a 2-year assignment where you feel a level of accountability to some amount of work. And you're climbing this corporate ladder, and you get experience, and then comes another assignment, and then you get more experience, and then you get
Yeah.
another assignment. And it's like the fulfillment that you get from the assignments. It's really interesting because, when you take on another role, the excitement comes and goes very quickly. It's not like something
Yeah.
that, just stays with you. You're like, okay, this is great. You go one next step up the corporate ladder, and then you're like, okay, I got it. And then all of a sudden, you probably realize that's not as fulfilling as I really was hoping that it would be after you've taken that next step. And so, listening to you, uh, I'm grinning here because you knew it was time for you to go, and you could have taken that next step at Capgemini with another 2-year assignment, but you realized that it was time for me to move on. And Aurelie, I'm curious if you want to comment on the point that I made about the climbing the corporate ladder in terms of you having as many roles ahead of you. Like, you obviously have done a really great job for both Accenture and Capgemini in the management consulting role, but you sort of had this vision of what you wanted to do early in your career, but you recognized that you had to go into corporate to get some experience. And I just wonder if you had any comments around this idea of when is it time to get off the train?
Yeah, absolutely. It's true that we can also, I maybe was caught up in that hamster wheel in a way. And as you were saying, we see the next assignment, and there is a fulfillment that can be short lived. And we are also getting a lot of benefits from the company, right? Status, new relationships, new stakeholders, kind of very interesting projects and topics. But it is true that I think I was not as fulfilled, and I was also kind of getting more and more disaligned in a way with what was truly fulfilling to me, which was a more direct job where I could see what I was doing. Because as I was also climbing the corporate ladder, I was doing less and less. I was managing more and more. I was more and more disconnected from the real work. And my work was revolving more and more around reporting, making sure that overall the job is done. But myself, I wasn't as much involved in really the work in itself, and so I think I wanted more of that, and I also wanted more freedom in a way, more autonomy on a personal level.
Yeah, I can imagine how that decision was so daunting in terms of making the decision to leave that security, especially after spending so many years developing yourself and getting experience. And then you're getting to a point where you sort of, interesting how you describe this disconnection from your core values of who you are as a person and what you want to do, and the impact of, I'm going to call it the machine, that the
Yeah.
institution of work. And it really sort of, it sounds like it just started to impact your quality of life in a way that you almost probably felt like you weren't free.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you just didn't have that freedom. I think when you start your first job out of college, you're someone who early in your life, your parents sort of created this family culture of where you were free to express yourself. You were free to, you played the piano and you wrote and, you were very artistic and you had a lot of freedom. And so it's just really interesting how you kind of began your journey of recognizing that you needed this corporate experience, right? And you went into the corporate world, you started working, and then all of a sudden it was sort of like constricting Aurelie in your ability to be free. And you knew early on that you had this desire to want to impact people at a personal and a
Right.
professional level. So, Aurelie, I'm curious, now you've been independent for for several years, for almost 4 years now. You're working on your own. You're coaching. You're working for Career Minds, and I wonder, when you reflect back, in terms of the transition and you pivoting out of corporate and you're now working on your own, you have this freedom and flexibility to make your own schedule, and you're working with lots of individuals on, their career and their professional, just in terms of like their personal and their professional life. What life lessons can you share for anyone who's thinking about making a pivot in terms of going out on their own? What advice would you
Yeah,
give them?
I would say a few things. Well, the first thing is that entrepreneurship is a journey of becoming in a way. I didn't identify as an entrepreneur right when I left Capgemini. It was really a journey of also embracing that new entrepreneur identity, which I didn't have when I left Capgemini. I was still very much involved in the employee mindset. And I remember that first year of entrepreneurship, I had a lot of doubts about, is this the right path? Did I make the right choice? Not necessarily because of COVID or because of what was happening in the world, but more because of like the new skills that I had to develop to be an entrepreneur. I didn't have any sales or marketing background, and now that was becoming really, very important as an entrepreneur to really learn marketing, learn sales, be able to sell services, and yeah, it was a journey, and I think now I can reflect when I reflect back and in hindsight how this really grew over time and how I embraced slowly that entrepreneur mindset. So I think that is a first advice that I would give, which is really important. And the funny thing is that, well, maybe the first year, every 2 days or maybe every week, I was really thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go back to corporate. I'm not made for this. I'm not cut for this kind of job. Like it is too
Mm,
hard. Entrepreneurship is really too difficult. And I saw how slowly, my mindset changed from, yeah, maybe next week I'm going to go back to corporate to, well, I'm never going back to corporate. And this has been a gradual change, a transition. And it's very funny to see how, yeah, I was so adamant at first to have that possibility to go back to corporate and even
mm,
thinking that that's what I would do to really, yeah, not even being an afterthought, the going back to corporate. And so
mm,
how I fully stepped into this entrepreneurial mindset and how I really now identify as an entrepreneur.
mm.
yeah, that is, I think, a very big piece in my journey.
Mm,
Then another advice would be to accept to start anew. It can be very daunting and very difficult when you change career, when you transition to a new career path. Like that idea of being a beginner again can be very difficult when you've had a lot of responsibilities, managing teams, um, and having all those benefits and comfort and everything. It is important to give ourselves some grace in that. Yes, we're starting anew. We won't be there indefinitely. We won't be in the beginner zone forever, but accepting the earlier, I think, and the faster we accept that, yes, we're going to be a beginner for some time, and
mm,
this doesn't say anything about us, I think is very important.
mm,
And still cultivating and nourishing the self confidence, even when we're stepping into, a new environment and with its own challenge and unique opportunities and challenges.
mm. Aurelie, that is so well said. You said two things that really struck me. The first is that it the newness of the change doesn't last forever. Like
Yes.
when you make the decision to step into something new and to make a change, the newness of the change does not last forever. And I think that is so well said. And the other thing that struck me was around, don't underestimate the the amount of the amount of courage that it would take to make a change. Because, like you had said early on, when you left corporate and you went out on your own, you're essentially changing an identity. And it doesn't happen overnight. Like that identity, you had an identity as a corporate worker for over more than a decade. You worked for some of the largest, consulting firms in the world, and you created an identity. And so for you to sort of step into this new identity, it doesn't happen overnight. I was just remembering when I left corporate and became an entrepreneur, I had an identity crisis because
Yeah.
just putting entrepreneur on a business card, going from human resource director to entrepreneur, I had imposter syndrome. Like it's not something that happens overnight. And so the fact that you said, give yourself some grace, like give yourself some time to let that identity really take shape, and then recognize that, it's a process that you have to sort of go through. And you obviously have come through on the other side. Like I know, like after the 4 years, I feel your confidence of who you are and the direction that you're on and the path that you're on is like so well defined. And I'm just really happy to hear the story and hear, kind of where you are today. It's so inspiring.
Thank you, Raymond. Yeah, and I relate so much with that identity piece, absolutely, where
Mm,
things, as when we do things for the first time, it can be an easy. There is a lot of discomfort when we do things for the first time. So, of course,
mm,
when we're all of a sudden positioning ourselves as an entrepreneur or an executive coach when we've never been that before, yes, there is discomfort in that, and it's so important also to embrace that discomfort, and as you said, to know truly that this is not going to last. And it's true that, well, I would say also that a lot of people have helped me step into that new identity. And first and foremost, the clients I've been working with, like I think they've made me more and more self-assured in this identity. And so it is this whole ecosystem that has allowed me to feel more and more self-confident and self-assured in that identity. And so that ecosystem is also so very important in a change.
I love that. Well, Aurelie, I really appreciate your time today. I loved hearing your story. I loved your journey. I enjoy getting to work with you day in and day out. What's the best way people
Me
can find
too.
you?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn and they can find me also on my website. So it's my first name and last name, all attached, aureliefoucart.com.
Hmm.
And yeah, on my LinkedIn at Aurelie Foucart.
Nice. Well, we'll provide your information in the notes. And Aurelie, thank you so much. It's been great. I've
Thank you,
loved our
Raymond. It's always
conversation.
a pleasure to working and chatting with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as find me on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time,